Hi, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am here today with Evan Wirig. And Evan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Right. So I'm fairly new to the podcasting scene myself. Kind of, we're kind of like on the same level here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recently started a podcast with the ambassador from Today's America, Gunnar Thordarson. That podcast is Freedom's Future. We've recently just moved it over to YouTube. It was exclusively over to Facebook for a time, but I think YouTube seems to be a better reach and platform for that. Okay. I kind of, as far as my background, I actually grew up in a very media heavy home. And so I actually was in news for a little while, and then left after, realizing that there just wasn't a lot of honesty in news media. And so I transitioned from that into more screenwriting and TV writing mainly. I actually had the last thing that I actually had fully produced was actually back in 2013. So, not too successful in that.
It takes 10 years to become an overnight success in any industry, definitely in Hollywood.
Yes, exactly. But it's been a really fun road. But the thing is, though, like the reason I kind of went over there in the first place was I figured, if I'm going to make stuff up, I at least want people to know that I made it up. And so that's kind of
it goes a long way. Yeah,
it does.
Integrity. I like it.
So so I left the news arena for a while, especially, which was hard because it's in my blood. My dad was a field reporter for a news station up in Idaho, and basically taught me everything I knew. Did radio DJing for a while too, and that wasn't really. Come on, I got a face that's made for the camera. Let's be honest here.
You.
But yeah, that's really the gist of who I am. And as far as my background goes, I like having things a bit more dynamic and be a bit more of a visual storyteller in that regard. And so, but as far as podcasting is concerned, with the events of everything that's been going on just the last 6 months alone, I kept feeling like, I've got to say something. I've got to go out there on a limb and say something about what's going on here, especially from a libertarian perspective. We haven't really gotten a lot of those. That doesn't sound crazy. And and so I wanted to throw that out there. And so that's when I got a hold of Gunnar, and, here we are.
And how did you and Gunnar meet and connect?
We actually currently live in Utah. And so while I grew up in California and was exposed to the whole media shindig there, I went to Utah for work. And surprisingly enough, there's actually a pretty big film scene out here.
Television, and there's a bunch of film festivals there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like you got Sundance and all that fun stuff. And but the thing is, though, is that we actually met over Facebook through a mutual friend. And I
this is the sunny part of social media.
Yes, the sunny part of social media, the stuff that actually is supposed to happen.
right.
And so he and I connected, and found that we agreed on a lot of things. Didn't agree on some things, but it wasn't enough to destroy the relationship. And so we
good healthy debate and discourse is good for everyone.
No, exactly. And so what happened is I reached out to him. It's like, what, we should start a podcast. And he's like, I'm going to bring someone else on for this. And he eventually, like, the third person didn't really want to continue on after that. But it's just really been me and Gunnar for the last little while, and we've been able to make it work whenever we've been able to kind of match our schedules, so to speak.
That's tricky, I know.
It is very tricky. We're both very busy men. And so, whenever we try to get together, especially with what happened last week, we were like, you know what, we've got to make this work and everything like that. And so we're slowly but surely climbing up there and getting everything ready to go. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So let's talk about last week. I wanted to podcast from there, but there was, first of all, no reception.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it was just pure mayhem. So it was not really conducive to podcasting, and it was really emotional too. So yeah, there's just a lot going on, but yeah, what are your thoughts from your perspective?
You and I have talked off camera ad nauseum about this. I am honestly
us and 200 other people, but yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, though, is that like I'm just absolutely disgusted at the display of what happened. I mean, with the people who went into the Capitol building, it really shouldn't have happened. And there were a lot of agitators. We know for sure that there was one Antifa guy there who flew out from Utah. But as far as him being by himself or whether he was being, with other people, I don't know. And maybe this is just my news background, but I like things being verified 3, 4, 5, 6 times before I dive right in there. And when it came out, especially that the Buffalo guy was a Q, was part of Q, I was like, oh, great. One of these guys. Like, honestly, with my interactions with a lot of Q folks, like I haven't really given Q really the time of day that it really deserves. Mainly because they're really the only people that make libertarians on the whole look sane. And so that's really kind of the thing. Like, I really didn't want to stick around or really pay any attention to them. And then to find out that these were the people that potentially, I mean, we don't know exactly for sure. We know at least one was. Yeah.
We know that one, I just want to clarify though. We know one was claiming to be. We know very little about who this character is. He could be, he could be there to make you look bad. We don't know. We really don't know. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, like, with all the evidence that we have right now, it's very like at least the evidence is pointing that way. Yeah. Sure. And that's really the only direction that we can take is where the evidence is pointing us. And that's what I really think. Honestly, like, January 6th was really the end of the road for me. And all these, people who are saying like, oh, it's not really the end yet. It's over. I'm sorry. As much as I would like to say that it's not, it really is. Because what happened January 6th, there could have been a fight after that point. Mm-hmm. But because of what happened, despite all the other instances of the Capitol being stormed and, no one dying or anything like that, this really put a tarnish on Trump's legacy. Trump had the opportunity to become like Reagan. And because of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. No, I mean, I actually wouldn't liken him to Reagan. I wouldn't liken him to either Lincoln or Washington.
Well, honestly, I probably would have compared him more to Coolidge. But, as far as like our modern political scape, people recognize Reagan more.
I get that. So. I think I'm a little bit older than you. So I have I used to have such a sunny kind of and not to say that I have a negative, a view of Reagan at this point, but I feel like Reagan said a lot of nice things, and his speeches were beautiful. A lot of which he didn't write, some of which he did. Mm-hmm. But now that I know more of what he actually did and the impact that it's had thereafter for this country, it wasn't all wonderful. Yes. Whereas I think so much, not to say that Trump was perfect, obviously he wasn't. Right. And nobody is, he's human. That's one of the things I argue with people a lot, I'm like, he's one man and he's not God, Right. And he's done a lot of great things, but I guess I see him like Lincoln, the Times, there's a lot of parallels in the Times. Yes. And Washington, the 1776, that I'm seeing a lot of parallels, so yeah. Those are, but yes, I understand in the modern.
I can understand that, but most people would connect it more to Reagan because let's face it, like you hear about Lincoln in history books and Washington and all that, and that's great. But the thing is that a lot of the times people like to have that physical connection, and most people who are
someone they lived through,
right. Yeah. Unfortunately, because of what happened last week on the 6th, he's more than likely going to have the legacy of Nixon. And that's what really upsets me.
Or worse. So my fear, I think that, and I'd love to hear your take on this, but my fear is not that okay, well, they're going to tarnish him in the media. They've already done that. They're going to say, they're going to paint his character negatively. They've already done that. They're going to say all these horrible things. That's fine. They've already done it. And that doesn't, I don't want to say it means nothing, but to me, it means nothing. I don't really care. I look at his actions, I don't have to, I'm not having dinner with the man, I like what he's done for this country. So, that's really what I look at. And he may be a wonderful person too. I don't interact with him on a day-to-day basis, so I can't speak to that. But I can say that things that he's done for this country, I really appreciate and think were, really favorable. My concern is that I don't think we're looking at just a stolen election, which is bad enough, but it's not just a stolen election to a Democratic candidate. We're really looking at the completion of a coup and a color revolution. And that to me is horrifying, truly horrifying. The potential ramifications of having our Constitution overthrown, having our government overthrown, being taken over by a potential totalitarian regime, the consequences of that, it's not just, I don't like the man in the White House. Like that to me means very little, I don't have to like him. But what it means for our lives and for the future of this republic and the future of the free will of humanity. Now, those things I care about. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, it's very... It is something very much to care about. And that's something that I honestly very much worry about as well. Honestly, as far as Biden is concerned, the man was ineffectual as vice president. At least as far as the business of the country was concerned. The man's corrupt as all hell, let's be honest. But, as far as his effectiveness as a president, I think it'll probably end up being the same. It'll still be the same pay for play type deals. People will, especially on the left, will start gradually going to sleep and all of a sudden start minimizing the atrocities of the president after 4 years of screeching about it incessantly. And what worries me is that because of the man's age and the fact that he's lived through 2 brain aneurysms, the man really isn't fit to be president. He wasn't fit to run. Right. And the only reason why he did was because of the Ukraine call in 2019. That's the only reason why he was propped up as the front runner.
Right.
And, and it led to the whole bogus impeachment hearing last year around this time. And honestly, the entirety of what Biden represents is just corruption and the establishment. What really worries me, though, is Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala, she still hasn't really addressed any of the things that she did as Attorney General of California. In fact,
she still hasn't given up her Senate seat.
Yeah, and that kind of lends credence to a lot of the conspiracies. They know something's going on. They just maybe, I don't know. But again, I get this probably is because I like. Whenever I practice journalism, I like having those journalistic ethics and having everything verified. The
one thing I will say about that, though, and I really respect it. I hear, and I like having tangible, solid evidence. I'm that kind of person. But I will say that we are living in times where when something is verified, it means that it's solid and it's been around for a while. Yeah. And we're living in times where an hour old news is old news. Yeah. And so things aren't going to always be, and that doesn't necessarily mean that something's not happening. It just means we don't have the evidence of it at the time. Right. That's not to say that there's not a lot of disinfo. We know there's a lot of disinfo. That being said, I just want to say that it's a strange time, and it's a strange time for journalism because it's unprecedented. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing. The journalism industry has really taken a huge hit as far as trustworthiness. I mean, right now, they are probably the least trustworthy entity outside of Congress. And Congress, I think, has barely double-digit approval rating.
I'm going to go with the negative double-digit, maybe? 0 or negative?
Oh, man. There are actually some people who do approve. Who'd have thought? But, I mean, well, I don't know. Are we using Dominion numbers on that way?
I think, yeah, good point. Okay.
But, yeah, I mean, and that's really the problem is that especially over the last 4 years, and it's been longer than 4 years.
Way longer.
And all of that. I mean, I remember in 2012 with the Aurora movie theater shooting, where all like the guy who claimed to be the Joker and had like this purple hair and everything like that. Like it was, but the thing is though, is that they tried pinning it on the Tea Party.
Right.
And it was not even connected to the Tea Party at all. It was just
this is why I say be careful of this one guy representing Q. Because even if let's just hypothetically say this guy was a Q shaman, he was Q everything. I mean, it's one person. And why is it that when the left has a couple of agitators burning down buildings, killing people, they don't represent us. But one guy who says he's a Q whatever, that represents all Trump supporters.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like it's important to separate Q from MAGAs. And the thing is though too.
Well, and it's also important to separate one guy who claims to be a Q fan from all Q people,
Right.
Yeah.
Like the thing that really kind of got my eyebrows raising as far as like Q and everything like that was a lot of the bloodlust when the word came down that the Capitol was under siege. And there was a lot of people in that group, like that 200 plus group that we're a part of, that were like, burn it all down. I want to see blood. And I was like, whoa, dude, like let's tone it down.
I don't want to see blood. That's
I don't either.
I'd like to see, I'm not gonna lie, I've definitely had fantasies of some arrest, but that's not blood. But I want justice. I want
accountability. That's what I want. I want accountability.
Absolutely.
And the thing is that justice isn't vengeance. We're not, we shouldn't be seeking out for blood. And that's really one of the things that really attracted me to libertarianism to begin with, was the fact that, we're not supposed to be seeking for blood. We're not going to run away from a fight. Hell, we'll even finish it if we have to, but we're not going to throw the first punch. Absolutely. And that's really, and I think
conservatives absolutely agree with that as well.
Yeah.
That's always been the premise. The Second Amendment, the principles of it is that it is for defense. It is not an offensive unless it's military action, and even then, this country has almost always operated on, with some exception, but mostly, we operate on defensive. It's to protect the country, have a strong military, so strong. And this Trump has definitely, been a somebody who promulgated. He have a military that's so strong that you don't need to use it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one of the things, like, people want to say, like, well, how do we stop someone like Trump rising in? I can give you exactly why. Do not prop up another Bush, McCain, or Romney. If you do that, then there will inevitably be another Trump. All right? That's really what happened, is that the moment they tried to push up McCain, especially, oh my gosh, John McCain. Man. And then Mitt Romney, I'm sorry, like I will fully throw this out there. I am a Latter-day Saint. I belong to the same church that Mitt Romney does, but I think the guy's a prick. All right,
well, he has zero integrity.
He really doesn't.
At best, he's a coward. At worst, he's he has zero integrity.
Well, I mean, he has the spine made of rubber, and that's putting it very kindly.
Yes, I agree.
And the thing is, what really turned me off from him, and I'm actually ashamed that I voted for him in 2012 against Barack Obama, because in all reality, it was Romney's to lose, and he lost it because he screwed the pooch, especially for me in particular, during that second debate. I don't know if you remember, but there were two instances. Mm-hmm. One was when he... when he was asked, Obamacare was heavily based off of Romneycare in Massachusetts. Why do you think Romneycare is constitutional while Obamacare was not? He just kind of hemmed and hawed and danced around the subject. It's a very simple answer, Mitt. Yeah. It's the 10th Amendment.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the second was when Candy Crowley pulled a... what was it? Basically, she jumped into the fray with Barack Obama and started debating him debating Romney at the same time. Chris Wallace, that's who it was. She pulled a Chris Wallace, and and that's the thing, is that it really just turned me off. The fact that he didn't even have, like, at the very least, a quip ready. I was like, I'm sorry, Candy. I didn't realize I was debating two people, and I would have prepared an extra 15 minutes. That's all.
I love when Trump said that. That was awesome.
Yeah. That's all he would have had to say. Yeah, and the thing is that he completely endeared it, and the thing is that both McCain and Romney thought that they could court the media all the way to the White House. And the thing is that Obama's ratings in 2012 were so low that it really was Romney's to lose. And he screwed the pooch by basically backing down, especially after what many considered was a stellar debate performance for the first debate, and then just waffled for the second and third debate. It was so bad. It was so atrocious. And and even then, there were allegations of election fraud occurring then. And that's what kind of really opened my eyes and kind of saw the parallels between 2020 to what we saw in 2012. But again, because Romney conceded out of niceness, didn't really feel the need to really even pursue any of them. And, all of a sudden we're seeing the very same things happen on a much grander scale. Yeah. In those very same locations. It's actually interesting. There is Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were the big three in 2012.
Right. Well, they're the big swing states, so
yeah. And then all of a sudden we start seeing it happen in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada as well. Yeah. There's something going on here. Like
coincidence.
Absolute coincidence. No, nothing to see here.
No.
But I mean, it's absolutely disheartening to kind of see, especially the Republican Party of Romney and McCain just waffle and fold like this. Oh, we must come together. We must reach across the aisle. I'm sorry. These people have been walking all over your asses for the last 50 years.
Absolutely.
And you're doing nothing about it because you want to be the nice guy. I'm sorry. We need to start playing their game.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think that is one of the biggest things that's come to light through this whole election cycle is what backstabbers and betrayal the GOP has been.
Oh yeah.
I think a lot of people, they support it because they support the ideas of the right, but that doesn't mean they support the GOP or the Republicans. And the Republicans certainly have shown that they don't support America.
Well, and the thing is that,
and that's not all of them, but a lot of them.
It's not. But those moderate Republicans, I'm sorry, but you're not moderate. You're progressive light. You're neocons, which is essentially another form of authoritarianism.
Absolutely. Which is on the left. I mean, these people who tell me that fascism is on the right, I'm like, no, it's totalitarianism. That is on the left.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing. Here's another thing that really just makes the United States such an incredible place is that we completely, the four quadrants of the political spectrum, right? Before the American experiment even began, it was just the top two.
Yep.
You had the left and the right, but they were both ultra authoritarian because on the European side of things, that's all they knew. All they knew was monarchies and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the American experiment begins, and we have a lot more of what is the real term of liberal society, where people were actually free. We had no kings, and we actually, have a constitution in place that places limits on the government. At least that's how it's supposed to work.
Yes.
And, and so that's essentially what happened. But unfortunately, as time has gone on, especially over the last 60 years, I would say since JFK's election, there's been a push more toward the authoritarian side of things as far as those who have been elected. And those who are more libertarian either get brushed off as crazies or are not even recognized at all. And that's what's really kind of disheartening about the current political system. And they've been allowed to basically shred the Constitution on both the authoritarian left and right for decades.
Yep.
And
absolutely. I would say all authoritarianism really is the left. It really is totalitarianism. They just like to pin it on the right because that's part of the rules for radicals.
Right.
Whatever your enemy is, you call them.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
exactly. And that's really kind of the major issue here is that, we ought to start paying attention to what they do and the sources that they read, not necessarily to.
Yes. Really good point. The sources they read. So I saw this with Obama as a really good example. People kept telling me, well, he's so moderate. And I said, he has outright said his mentor. I know. You can't even contain your laughter.
Moderate.
Yeah, exactly. He outright said that his mentor is Saul Alinsky. Nobody who's a disciple of Saul Alinsky is moderate.
No.
It just, the two cannot be in the same sentence.
No.
But the same goes for, Clinton. And I didn't even know it at the time, but Clinton's mentor was Carol Quigley.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we need to pay attention to these things, not look at the pretty eloquent speeches they give, because that's acting, that's orating. And the job is for it to be palatable to the masses. They're trying to win your vote. They're trying to con you. I mean, that is part of the job, right? When you get up on stage, you want to win over the audience so you can get their vote. But pay attention to what they say outside of that pretty speech,
Well, that's part of what was Trump's appeal, to be quite honest, is he's not a great communicator. I mean, that's the one thing that he and the Gipper do not have in common at all. Reagan was called the great communicator for a reason. Yeah. He was essentially our version of Winston Churchill.
He was an actor. Yeah,
he was an actor. And while Trump, was a TV personality by the time he ran originally in 2012,
he was a TV personality, not an actor. He played himself.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens with reality TV.
Exactly.
Seriously, it always boggles my mind that there's writers for reality TV, but
there's casting calls for reality. I'm an actris. I know. They kept sending me. My manager would be like, "Do you want to go for this?" I'm like, "Why am I auditioning for reality TV? It's reality, right? Like,
right?
Why am I auditioning for this?"
But in any case, like he's not very polished in the way that he speaks, and that unfortunately is like, if you've done business like with a lot of actual CEOs and business people, especially those who are from like the yuppie 80 type people.
Yeah.
That's how they speak, especially if you're from Long Island. That's the language, that's the lexicon. Yep. And it really turned a lot of people off. Hell, it turned me off originally in 2016. And actually when he I actually registered as a libertarian before he ran, but I was like, you know what, there's no way I'm going to vote for this guy, mainly because of the rhetoric and, all this other stuff. But he pleasantly surprised me with what he actually did do.
Yes.
I mean, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in San Diego, about half an hour away from the Mexican border. I've seen what goes on down there. Yeah. I know exactly what goes on down there. And it's not just Mexicans or people from South America coming over. We've got Middle Eastern comers. We forget sometimes, and this was a huge news story for about 9 months after 9/11, that the people who were responsible, that about two of the pilots that were responsible for flying the planes actually came in through the Mexican border and learned to fly at a college just about 10 miles north of San Diego proper.
Wow.
Like, that was what was huge news in the San Diego area for like 9 months after 9/11. And
I don't know that I knew that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Huh. I mean, I was like 14, 15 years old at the time, but the thing is that was huge news, and no one would really stop talking about it. None of the teachers would stop talking about it. None of my friends stopped talking about it. Right. And my dad, even though he's a news guy and he's not anymore, but he's still a political junkie himself. And he's like, this was nuts. But yeah, not a lot of people knew that. And they didn't know that these kinds of people were going through our porous southern border. And there's a whole bunch of different issues that are going on. I mean, let's face it. We have, the Trumpers have the Make America Great Again. Why in the world shouldn't there be a Make Mexico Great Again? Why shouldn't there be? But the reason for that is that, because of all the political corruption and unrest and everything like that, they have a pressure release valve down there.
Right.
And so whenever, things start getting a little bit too out of hand, they send out these pamphlets. Hey, go to America. And it ends up, quelling that unrest for a time until they have to, let's release the pressure again. We don't have that here. Right. All right, and the pressure, especially of what we saw last week, is mounting. And I don't necessarily know, where would we go if they do have a pressure release valve? There is no pressure release valve. And what really scares me and what really worries me is that, if things do escalate to that point again, or even escalate to the point where there is an actual civil war, I don't know what kind of outcome there will be. Yes, there will be a few veterans that will come to the, the side of liberty and everything like that. But there's just as many veterans that want government control, that want socialism, that want communism. And that just boggles my mind, especially with a lot of the things that they have experienced in, Vietnam, World War II, Iraq, and other places where there's been armed conflict.
Wow. What makes you say that there are just as many veterans who really want a communist or totalitarian regime?
Well, admittedly, a lot of those who actually do are actually up the higher ranking officials. We'd have the generals.
I've
and
heard
things
that.
Like that.
I've heard that. But I think that's more corruption. They're looking for payouts and buyouts and personal gain.
I spent quite a bit of time at Camp Pendleton as a kid.
Yeah.
And and I'm not an army brat or anything like that. I just had a lot of friends who were. And a lot of those friends who ended up joining the Marines or even went to MCAS Miramar to join the Air Force, it was during the Bush era. And they were so disgusted with what Bush was doing that they were all in for Obama. And then when Trump came onto the scene, even though he was
ironically, because they're cousins and they're part of the same camp essentially, but go on.
Yeah. But as soon as Trump came onto the scene, because they were so all in for Obama, they're like, the man's a menace. And, admittedly, there are some that, were so, that are very much pro-America that, if the president does well for the military, they do well for the American people on the whole, that they're going to throw their weight behind him. And so it's going to be very interesting that if there is a civil war that comes about, those veterans that, were more for Obama than they were for Trump, I don't necessarily know where they're going to fall, because I honestly worry that it may end up coming to the point where, because the right, and let's face it, the right is not nearly as organized as the left is, particularly when it comes to things like Antifa. We may end up getting stomped. That's part of my worry there.
Wow, that's a really scary thought. Yeah. I'm hearing it that there's validity, but it's really scary. I'm like, I have to process this.
Yeah, and it's a lot to process, because let's face it. I mean, like when it came to January 6th, okay. And people stormed the Capitol. There were more people who were caught up in the moment, and because of like maybe at most 50 independent actors that went in. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Ashley Babbitt, the Air Force veteran that lost her life. Yeah. She was one of those people that ended up getting caught up in the moment.
Yes.
And let's face it, we weren't exactly organized. There was no game plan. People just kind of like, after they broke, after they walked
when
through
you
the
watch the
velvet
videos,
lines,
I mean, it's like all these people with their cameras just kind of like looking around and like,
like now what?
Really, somebody just lost their life. Why are we treating it like a scene from a movie? I mean, that's really, I've seen like scene from a movie. That's what it looked like.
Yeah. Meanwhile, like you have things like Antifa and like all the agitators from this past summer alone, who are going around, they're marching along in the streets, and then all of a sudden like riots start breaking out. And there was an actual plan of attack to take down the police precinct in Minneapolis. They are very organized, far more organized than we are. And that's, again, what worries me is that, despite the value and the fervor that we may have, if we're not organized, we may end up losing. And that's a really... that's something I think a lot of people on the right need to recognize, is that we say, we may, stock up on guns and ammo. Okay, well, what now? What's our training? What's our avenue? What's our plan of defense? What's our strategy here?
Right.
And there is none. Meanwhile, Antifa has been basically...
I've heard they've been training with ISIS, actually. I've heard they've been training with ISIS, which is also horrifying. Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up an interesting point about the military and how they're, especially at the higher rankings. And I've read articles about this, and I've heard inside sources talk about this as well. And what I've actually heard is that Trump did want to, and this is just hearsay, but it is from people who are close to the Trump administration, that he actually did want to invoke the Insurrection Act, and there just wasn't enough support. And that if he can invoke it, but if the military isn't willing to execute it, it doesn't matter.
And it's the same thing with martial law.
Right, absolutely. I've heard, and I know there's lots of rumors, circulating, and I don't claim to have like the confirmation. I'm not privy to that. I don't know that any of us would be, but I'm not putting that the no stamp of seal on this. But yeah, just that I have heard a lot of people talk about it and it has been circulating. But what I have heard is that supposedly he did sign it, and that there are military generals who are fighting him because they have their own interests. They're saying, okay, we don't want you, and they're bribing him. They're bribing him to go to war because they benefit from that, and they're bribing him for deals like payoff deals. And again, I don't know this to be true. This is rumors circulating, but I would believe it, to be really honest. And that's pretty scary.
Oh, especially with like the whole issue with Vindman last year. It wouldn't surprise me either. A lot of those top military people, you're right, they stand to benefit whenever there is some kind of armed conflict going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying, well, that's why we went into Iraq in 2003. That's why all these different wars that Obama started in Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, occurred under Obama. And let's face it, these are people that get rich off of blood, and it's absolutely sickening.
It is. It's truly horrifying. So this kind of brings me back to that question, when I was saying my big fear personally is not just that, all the good that Trump has done will, be tainted. My worry is that he will go down as the president that lost the republic. And that's, presupposing that we believe that we still have a republic.
Right.
That's debatable as well, because, there's a lot of evidence that points that, that's more of a facade at this point. So he could be the president, let's just hypothetically say in the next 9 days, who either restores the republic, saves or restores, or the president who lost the republic. And if this republic goes, this is just my personal belief. I don't believe that it's just about this country. I really believe that we stand for freedom and we stand for the free will of humanity. And if we go, the rest of the world goes, and it really is a battle for the survival of humanity. Right. So, well, what are your thoughts on that, and where can we go?
Well, I'm nowhere, really. I mean, you brought up a very interesting point and actually reminded me of when Reagan was stomping for Barry Goldwater in the '68 election. You probably saw this video. Many of your viewers have probably seen this video. It's on the Reagan Foundation YouTube channel, but Reagan gives this speech. And in it, he relates a story where he and a friend were talking to this Cuban immigrant, and the immigrant was talking about the atrocities of Castro's Cuba. Excuse me. The friend turns to Ronald and says, we don't know how lucky we are. The immigrant kind of became indignant. It's like, how lucky you are. I had somewhere to run to. And that's a very scary thought. I mean, like you mentioned, where do we go? We have nowhere to go. I mean, I have family in Canada too. And honestly, I feel like the son of Pierre Trudeau should go away.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
I will not dignify him by calling him by his actual name. He is the son of Pierre Trudeau to me. But he, like, honestly, like, the only reason why people outside of Canada, and those who are like uber left in Canada, or not those uber left in Canada, really care for him is because, he is woke. But in all actuality, like, when he came into office, the Canadian dollar was actually stronger than the American dollar. And then all of a sudden, the economy's in shambles. There's unrest actually growing in Toronto and Quebec. There was actually martial law instituted in Quebec just a few days ago.
I know. That's horrifying. And they're using COVID as the reason.
Yeah.
A virus? We're going to institute martial law because there's a virus?
Right. And the thing is that and a bit as a side note, the more we learn about the virus, the more we realize this really wasn't that big of a deal to begin with.
No.
But in all actuality, what's really disheartening is that a lot of people are saying, well, there's just as many, if not more, freedoms in Canada. No, there's not.
There's not. No. That's a fallacy. And Canada is usually about 10 years ahead of us with the socialist agenda.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, though, is that they still bend the knee to the queen.
They
do. Take that as you will.
Yeah.
But that's the major issue is that, like, they honestly feel like they have this their finger on the pulse of what the rest of the world is going to be. Like, I'm sorry, but Trudeau is really nothing more than a sycophant in his own right. The last time there was a major election called, his party actually lost the majority in their parliament. Yep. And by the time he actually calls for an election to be for a new prime minister, he's more than likely going to lose. And honestly,
he's also the man who, don't forget, who was touting how COVID was the perfect opportunity for the Great Reset.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh man,
the supposed conspiracy theory, by the way, the Great Reset is just that's just hogwash. Conspiracy theory. It's right on the front page of the World Economic Forum. No conspiracy.
Exactly, and that's the thing.
Right out there in the open.
We want to talk about things that are actually conspiracies. Okay, fine. Let's talk about things that are actually conspiracies, but don't just call something that you don't agree with and you don't like talking about a conspiracy, especially when things have actually turned out to be right regarding it. I'm sorry, but there's so many things.
The term conspiracy theorist actually was coined by the CIA, and it was weaponized in 1967.
Yep.
And it was weaponized. It was basically just a variation of Herbert Marcuse's liberating tolerance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see it now, because that's anytime anybody, especially on the left, wants to shut down a conversation. I've experienced it so many times. I start saying something, they don't agree. You're a conspiracy theorist. I'm like, at this point, I'm like, all right. Call me conspiracy. It's like calling somebody racist. It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything anymore. No, and that's a really big problem. Is that, like, they're calling people all these different names, like conspiracy theorists. Okay, fine. So why don't you actually let that conspiracy and actually disprove that conspiracy? Oh well, I don't really need to do that. You just need to educate yourself. Okay. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's get that out of the way right now. I mean, we've seen that happen, like with sunlight being the best disinfectant when it came to the 9/11 truther movement, when it came to chemtrails, the JFK assassination, and even with the moon landing. Those are probably the biggest four of the conspiracy theorists. Oh, this didn't actually happen. No, sorry. There's just so many different things that actually did happen. I mean, oh, well, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. They weren't melted. They were bent. Have you ever watched any kind of like blacksmith work? Come on. But meanwhile, you have all these people being deplatformed. I mean, Alex Jones and Milo Yiannopoulos in 2018. Trump,
you can't even get early Alex Jones videos. Like they're gone. They're like wiped from archives. They're gone.
And that's what's really scary. It's like, I'm sorry, if something is a conspiracy, you let it bake in the sun. You don't hide it away, because then that only lends credence to that conspiracy, and people are more likely to believe it than you.
Exactly. You let it come to light, and then people will see, oh, this is bogus. Yeah. If it's really such a outlandish concept and such an outlandish theory, then let it reveal itself.
Exactly.
And it'll die. Yeah, exactly like you said. You're just giving credence to it by hiding it. So speaking of which, Twitter took down 60,000 accounts.
Yeah.
That's insane. At this rate, it's going to be millions by the end of the week.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that it hasn't necessarily happened to my account as of yet. Although I don't
think I have enough of a following for that to happen.
I probably don't either. But I've been kind of like, okay, how far can I go before they finally actually kick me off?
Let's test these waters. Yeah,
test it out.
I know a lot of people are saying it's like a badge of honor now. Yeah, you've been deplatformed from Twitter.
Yeah, and that's honestly, like, it's probably a lot of people who have actually been banned from Twitter, but also a lot of people who are moving, well, at least before they got shut down, Parler, and I guess now Gab and Telegram, because all of these different social media companies that are popping up, like, I'm sorry, like, okay, so people were like, well, if you don't like our terms of service, then go ahead and make your own platform. Okay, we'll go ahead and do just that. No, not like that. Don't do that way. I was like, oh, geez, really? And the thing is that...
Well, it reminds me of the whole COVID conversation. Follow the science. Wait, no, not that science. Follow this science.
Right.
Okay.
You mean the science that you keep flip-flopping on? Great.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like science to me. Yeah.
Oh man, but it's exactly the kind of thing. And the thing is, though, is that like these entire corporations, like all these people who are pushing for this and celebrating the censorships that's taken place, not just now but also over the last few years.
Yeah,
it's like, well, they're private companies. Like, okay, well, first off,
under Section 230, no.
Yeah. Well, and that's in Section 230, like they're given the permission to act as publishers and curate content.
No, they're given the permission to
act. Platforms.
They're not publishers. They're net neutrality platforms. They're not publishing agents. They're the opposite. And this is actually something that's interesting about Parler, because they were defending Section 230. So in a way, not to say that I think they will survive. They'll find a new AWS. They'll figure this out, and hopefully they'll revive, and it'll just be a little bit of downtime. But just on principle, they stood behind Section 230, which they shouldn't have. And their argument was that you can compete. Well, you can't compete when the technocrats are controlling the platform on which you're competing.
Right.
That takes away the free market. You no longer have a free market. So the thing about Section 230 is that, and I've had this argument with so many people, is that so a publishing agent, like you were saying, a publishing agent would be like the New York Times or the Epic Times, right? You know what you're going to get when you go to both. They've been edited, they've been filtered. There's a specific viewpoint that is allowed on there. They have full purview to say, I reject that. That doesn't agree with our, with our line of thinking. But the analogy with the Section 230, if you take something like Twitter, it's supposed to be like a telephone or like a true internet search, not a Google
town
search.
Square.
Yeah, a town square. That's a great analogy. And it's supposed to be like if I were to write a text, Twitter is like a text to somebody, only it's a public town square. Exactly. And that's what people don't understand. It's not a private company if you have net neutrality privileges.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that it's supposed to be like the town square, like the public square doctrine is what it's supposed to be. And the thing is, with the fact that they're curating all this content and then stopping other avenues for that content to be created, it's really just kind of just shows that they are more powerful than the government because of the protection that the government gave them. And
I think that they're colluding with the government, to be really honest. I think they've gotten government money. I think there's CIA money, and I think that they're a right arm. They're using it to collect information for the government. I felt that way about Facebook when it first came out, and I remember this was everybody crazy conspiracy theorists. I'm like, just saying. I don't know. I did say this 15 years ago, but and I mean, I am totally complicit. I'm on Facebook, so I'm part of the problem. I'm very aware of that. And
I wouldn't necessarily say part of the problem, because really, where else can you go? They're shutting down everything else.
Yes, and so not only are they violating Section 230 privileges, but they're violating antitrust laws.
Yeah,
because they really are a monopoly, and they should be broken up.
Well, kind of along those lines, Parler has actually sued Amazon because of what they did. I honestly think they ought to win on that one, because there really was
the courts will hear it. If the courts will hear it.
Gosh.
I kind of laughed when they did. I was like, on face, I love that they did it, because it was such a good statement. But will the courts hear it? Yeah.
Well, and that's the problem, is that will the courts hear it? And honestly, I also think, kind of along those same grounds, kind of taking a step back to Trump, I think he has grounds to sue Twitter and Facebook for removing his profile on both.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, especially because of that ruling from the Second Circuit from a couple years ago. They said, okay, well, he's a public official. He can't block anyone. Okay, if he can't block anyone, you can't block him.
Exactly. And these people who are like, supporting this, they're fools if they think that they're not coming next. And the other thing that I think people don't understand is, and this is just, it's testament to the downfall of the education system, because when you study history, the first thing they do is censor free speech. And what comes not too long after is killing people. I mean, it's genocide. This is not just, oh, well, now I can't say what I want on Twitter and I can't post a picture of me and my dog. That's not what this is about. And I know I sound histrionic and melodramatic, but you look at Nazi Germany, 1933, you know, like that is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
You know, it's the First Amendment, then the Second Amendment, then Third and Fourth, and then comes the concentration camps and the gulags.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, though, is that like it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, people don't realize that the people who censor have always been on the wrong side of history.
Always.
Always.
And it's so ironic because the people who are saying that have been for the past year saying you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, the whole BLM movement. Haven't you heard that? Like way more times. The next person who says it, I'm going to be like, I want to punch you. You know, like, And I just keep thinking, really? Have you actually studied history? Because you would know you're on the wrong side. Though the people who censor are always on the wrong side.
Right. And that's they don't get it. They don't understand because they don't know history. And this is the really disheartening thing about our education system, not just higher education, because those are easy targets, let's be honest, but also with primary and secondary education. I mean, in some ways, those are things that we're looking. Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at the school system, like, again, I'm going to go to California because that's my experience here. And they're the worst, I think. Oh, they are among the worst for sure. Because, like, throughout the entire time of my, schooling and education in California, there were all these different little philosophies that were thrown in there in, like, math class and English. Math class, like, math! Yeah. It's like, okay, we're supposed to be learning about the quadratic equation here, and you're talking about racism? How? Why? Like, I didn't understand it there. But the thing is, though, is that, like, that's the kind of the mentality, and it's gotten to the point now where, like, they're saying that 2 + 2 = 5 now. They are legit doing that. Like, that's 1984, straight out of 1984. Straight out of 1984. I know. My tagline. I saw somebody with a shirt that said "Make Orwell fiction again." Yeah. I'm like, that's my tagline. I'm like, really, please make Orwell fiction again. Yeah. Like, because that's exactly it. Like, they tried to justify it with 2 + 2 = 5. And I don't understand how. What is their justification? How is 2 + 2 = 5? Oh, like they were talking about, like, so if we're just adding the two full numbers, yes, it's 2 + 2 = 4. However, we don't necessarily know if there's any decimal points or any fractions after them. So yeah, for all intents and purposes, 2 + 2 could equal 5. Like, okay, the only way that would actually work is if we knew what actual additional digits were added to that formula. So if it was 2.5 and 2.5, well, yeah, then it would be 5. Yeah. Yeah, but 2 + 2 is 4. 4. Sorry, I feel like Picard. There are 4 lights. Oh man, I'm like enthusiastic. I can't even wrap my head around this. It's so mind-boggling to me. Yeah, it's mind-boggling that they have the audacity to put this forth, but not just that, but then they justify it. And how damaging is this to kids who are growing up and they literally can't learn math? I mean, not that anybody knows math anymore anyway, because everybody uses calculators and nobody. So, but it is actually important. And it's important that people learn that there are actually rules, that there are facts, there are absolute facts. Not everything is subjective reality. Right. And I think that this is by design, because this is part of the cultural Marxist and postmodernist philosophy that they're trying to inculcate so that they can usurp, for usurpation. Because if nothing means anything and if everything's fluid, then they can tell you and convince you anything. Yeah, I mean that's the one of the things. One blessing that has come from the whole COVID restrictions and everything kind of shutting down has been the aspect of homeschooling beyond the rails. I concur, and that's one of the my wife and I we've homeschooled our kids for the last 2.5 years at this point, so it really didn't change anything for us. But the thing that I've actually noticed when it comes to a lot of parents who have started homeschooling their kids before taking them out entirely was that they were actually kind of had an ear perked whenever they were on their Zoom classes for that day. And just hearing some of the things coming out of there, it was just like, what? Or how long have you been being taught this? Like, oh, this has been going on forever. It was like, we're taking you out. We're homeschooling you.
We're pulling you out.
And the thing is, though, is that, homeschooling is not just a thing that's exclusive on the right. I mean, there are a lot more right-leaning homeschoolers than there are on the left. Yes. But those on the left are rising as well as far as homeschooling. And, that I think is a good thing. We need more of that marketplace of ideas among all aspects of life. Homeschoolers, public schoolers, along the whole gamut there. Mm-hmm. And the fact is,
I think the schools have enough left leaning. They pretty much dominated it for the past literally century. So I think there's enough.
Yeah. It's gotten bad since 1979. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would actually say, I think it really started with the Institute for Social Research at Columbia University. Yeah. When William Munzenberg and Antonio Gramsci left and founded the Frankfurt School. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's 100 years ago.
Yeah. But it just goes to show, and this kind of dovetails over what I have been kind of pushing for, especially since the Obama second term. We need to have more people willing to step up, especially on the right, into entertainment and education. We need it. It's no longer, it'd be nice. No, it's a necessity now. Because that's the way we change the culture. It is through education and entertainment. And if we don't have more people on the right to battle the terrible ideas of the left, it's not going to get fixed. It's an uphill battle now because there are people who are finally starting to realize that. But at the same time, there's still a lot of people who are like, you know what, it's not worth it. You can't really, at the very beginning of this show, you mentioned, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of hard work in that regard, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not possible. And so,
I absolutely think it's a fight and a cause worth fighting for. It's one that I've certainly been, very, very supportive of for a very long time. And certainly, speaks to a lot of my, my whole passion diving into the Frankfurt School and, the damage that those ideas have done. So and being an actress and a producer, it's something I am very, very passionate about.
Yeah.
But I think, and so certainly not to undermine, that cause, and that people absolutely need to get involved in education, in entertainment. But I think that we're in a very imminent time where, because they are censoring so heavily, and because if, we still have 9 days, so I'm not going to be definitive about this, but if Biden is, coronated and arrogated, because he wasn't legitimately elected, so we will say it was an arrogation, but if they do execute that plan, then we know he's a puppet, as you said, in terms of his health and his well-being, but he's more than that. He's a puppet of communist China, the CCP. And the CCP is a tool for the globalists. We know that. They're using communism as a tool for, the global world order. Yeah, absolutely. And, that we know that now, that's pretty public. So my concern is, as, insidious and nefarious as a lot of Kamala Harris, if she becomes the next coronated in line, we know her policies will be quite detrimental to the nation. But my concern is that if we are in a takeover position, as you said, how do we fight back? My thought has personally been, and I'd love to know your thoughts on this. I know there's been 3 motions now from Texas, and they are the only state that does actually have the clause, and they could secede. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. I don't have any illusions of grandeur about anything at this point. I'm very aware that we are in an uphill battle. But I think it's something worth exploring. And what are your thoughts on it?
Secession, I'm kind of torn on that. History has this weird way of repeating itself.
No.
And so, I honestly have no problem if, say, like Washington or New York decided to secede first and see if that happens, because what history has shown is that it's really kind of a toss back. I mean, let's face it, during the Revolution, the 13 original colonies put out an article, like a giant article of secession in the form of the Declaration of Independence,
right?
George III. And then during the Civil War, all these different states got together to secede from the Union over slavery. And it really is a bit of a toss-up. I mean, are we going to have that kind of secession like what happened in 1776, or is it going to be more like 1860? We don't know. And that's kind of my worry. A lot of people may try to paint it as more 1860 with the Southern Rebellion. But honestly, I think when it comes right down to it, if Texas is somehow successful, there will be plenty of other states that will fall in line, particularly I think with Republican legislators. I think there will be some states that will surprise us, even though they may have, say, Republican or Democrat executive branches. It's the legislatures that really ultimately have the power for that.
Yes.
And so I think what will probably end up happening is Georgia probably will stay put. But I think Pennsylvania will join the secession movement, and
I think you're right, actually.
And that's the major thing there. I hope and I pray that it doesn't necessarily come to that, because if it does, there will be blood, and I don't want that to happen. Right. And the thing is that like we need to be. Yeah, I'm sorry. I am a pacifist at heart. Like I said, I'm not going to run from a fight, but I'm not going to start one.
I know, I get it, and I support that.
And that's
but I think my concern is that I don't disagree with you that would be there will be blood. I'm not looking for blood. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm certainly not. I'm the last person. Right. I will be killed in a fight. So I'm pretty strong, but I'm pretty sure that like anyone who wants to take me out is going to. They're going to succeed. So just saying, it's not what I'm looking for, but. And I certainly I don't want to see others die. Like it's just I don't mean to make light of it at all. But it's just so overwhelming. I have no other response. But
I don't blame you for that. Like, we all have our own little coping mechanisms. Like
yeah, exactly. But I think my concern is that I think that there will be blood either way. Yeah. And so my hope is what will preserve the free will of humanity. I keep going back to that because it really, to me, this really is a battle of good versus evil. It's a battle of free will versus totalitarianism. And that is good versus evil. And so it's not that I want there to be, I'm not looking for how do we fight? That's not what I'm looking for.
Right.
But I'm looking for how ultimately, if we can restore a republic, we can restore a place that stands for freedom.
Right. I think when it comes right down to it, we have to stand for the Constitution no matter where we are. And in the end, I don't think it's going to be in Washington. I really don't. The corruption, the swamp is far too deep that I don't even know if it can be drained. And that's really kind of the sticky situation that we have here. But in all honesty, I think when it comes right down to it, the Constitution will end up being safe, but it won't be in Washington. And we need to start looking for people who can stand where they are to hold it up and to save it by the time it gets to that point where it's hanging by a thread.
Yeah, that's well said. I'm curious how you think we can do that. How do we stand for it?
We stand for what's right. We stand for what's good. We stand for defense. We don't stand to attack. We protect the things that we truly do love, and we don't, demean others as much as we would like to. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there are things out of the playbook that we must be able to take from them, but at the same time, we also have to. There's a bit of a marketing plan, I would say.
Okay.
We have to be able to market ourselves as the more desirable thing. I mean, Trump, as unpolished of a speaker that he was an excellent marketer and an excellent brander. And we need to have that kind of know-how in order to reach people on an individual level. And we need more liberty-loving people in the local and state governments, in the state executive branches, and then push for people that will actually stand for the Constitution, stand for freedom, stand for liberty wherever they are at, and actually put them within the positions of power in Congress. And I think a big part of that, too, would be to start advocating, first and foremost, to get rid of the lobbying efforts on K Street. If we were able to get rid of K Street, I think it would make our job a lot easier.
I think that's true. Absolutely. That's a really good point. I want to speak to something you said, though, when you said, you stand for defense as opposed to being offensive. My concern is that, and we want to stand for people who stand for liberty and put those people in power. My concern is that I think a lot of our liberties have been stripped.
Yes.
And at what point what point is there a hard line? Like, what do we do? Because I personally think that all these COVID sanctions, people just went along, and I was screaming back in February, March, I saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
And to me, this is, I hate to keep going back to Nazi Germany, but it's for your health. It's for your health. I made a meme of, I went to Vegas, so I could go get a manicure and go to a restaurant, literally, some things were open, and everybody there's smoking, these people with their chin diapers, and they're smoking their cigarettes. And my friend's pointing it out to me, and she's like, "Do you see this? They have their mask and they're smoking cigarettes." And I turned to her and I said, "Of course, it's for your health."
Yeah. Right. And that's a very tricky thing. A lot of people have been brainwashed to think that the government is there to help them.
Right.
When in actuality, it does nothing better than screw them over. But what I mean by defense is not by playing defense. We're not Romneyites. We're not always on the back foot. Good. We are on the front foot and on the front lines in all of these. But if we see something is wrong, we step in to defend. We do not attack without cause. And that, I think, is probably the biggest thing, is that if people just left each other alone, we could just all have policy disagreements, and everything would be a lot better than it is now. But it's not that point. It's not just policy disagreements anymore. No. They're talking about complete and totalitarian rule over your lives, basically saying you are nothing more than an infant, and you do not deserve to make any decisions about what you think is good, what your money ought to be spent on, or any of it. You need us to take care of that for you. And that is absolutely wrong. And we cannot be on the back foot any longer. We need to step forward and say, no, enough is enough. And we will stand in defense of our liberty, in defense of our freedoms, in defense of our families and our faith. That is what I mean by defense. We're not, again, we can't play the game like Romney does. No. We can't.
No. Absolutely not. We've seen how that played out, and that's not very good. Did you see them chanting on the plane there?
Yeah, I saw that. I thought it was hilarious. I didn't necessarily think it was completely appropriate, but I thought it was funny.
It was definitely funny.
I really did, yeah.
It was amusing. I thought that was a little bit of, that's harmless kind of revenge, right?
Yeah. In all honesty, Romney does deserve to be at the very least primaried, if not outright defeated in 2024. There's absolutely, the only reason, and this is really what's really kind of upsetting to me. Romney is about as much of a grifter as John McCain was. John McCain went to Arizona for an easy political victory, and he was in the Senate for almost 40 years before he died. And I think that's ultimately Romney's plan when it comes right down to it, because when push comes to shove, he was not born or raised in Utah. I mean, he was born in Mexico, raised in Michigan, and was governor of Massachusetts. Yeah, he went to BYU for a while and got his bachelor's there, but let's be honest. I mean, outside of that and meeting his wife there's not really much more to it than that as far as his Utah tenure. And then he comes back to Utah in 2015 after a very disappointing and failed presidential run. And instead of fading into the background like he initially promised, he goes and runs for the Senate. And I'm sorry, but it honestly makes me wonder if he actually still has his eyes on the White House. But let's face it, if he were to run again, he would have to run like Trump. And even then, no one would believe him because, one, he's damaged goods, and two, no one trusts him over what essentially would be a backstab to his constituents here in Utah.
Yeah. What do you think about, so we have 9 days, and they're trying to impeach and do 25th Amendment on Trump. 9 days.
Yeah. The 25th Amendment was blocked today. It was kind of amusing.
Okay. I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, so it was actually kind of amusing because like the very last motion, like the entirety of the full House session lasted less than 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And toward the tail end, like the last minute and a half, someone from Virginia comes up. I want to invoke articles of motion to press for the 25th Amendment because Donald Trump is no longer fit to serve in the presidency. And then all of a sudden, someone from West Virginia comes up. I object. The chairperson was like, okay, we'll reconvene tomorrow at 9:00. Gavel bang. It's like okay, see you tomorrow. Like that's all it was. And so there was.
So it wasn't fully. I mean, they're still gonna reconvene.
Yeah. I mean, like, and the thing is, though, is it has.
With 8 days left.
Yeah, there's 8 days left, and it still has to go through the House Judiciary Committee, and then it also has to be accepted by the Senate Judiciary Committee. Yeah. And I'm sorry, there's not enough
time. There's not enough time for that. No. It's so ludicrous.
It is. And the thing is, though, is that it's all symbolic at this point. It's all just a very big, like, F you to Trump. Like, they want to say that they were able to stop Trump from completing a full term. And that's all their goal is at this point, I feel like. I don't necessarily feel that it's because, they're scared of anything or anything like that. I think it's, they're so apoplectic about this man who essentially broke the system in 2016 that, they just want to make sure that he does not finish one full term. And I honestly think they're going to fail in that regard. And Trump may end up running again in 2024 and be the next Grover Cleveland. I mean, that... I think he'll be both the 45th and the 47th president at that point.
Well, that's if we still have a republic, and that's a big if. I mean, they really did rig the election. This is not, that's a really big if. And I hate to entertain that just because I think there's so much that needs to be dealt with now.
Yeah.
Certainly if we can clean things up and he can run, then great. I support it. It's not that I don't, but I just don't want to undermine the ramifications of what has occurred and what that leads us to now. But I think you said something interesting. You said you don't think it's that they're scared. And I'm not even pointing to like the conspiracies around that, but I think that I would actually push back a little bit on this because I think he knows so much. He is an outsider. Mm-hmm. He's an outsider who's an insider, though. You think about it. I mean, he's somebody who grew up as one of the elites his whole life, right? And as a very successful mogul. And so he's an outsider to DC, but he's not an outsider to the elite club. And so I think he is privy to a lot. And I think we all can agree at this point, there's a tremendous amount of corruption.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he knows that, and he has the ability to expose it. And so I'm not so sure that they're not scared of that.
Yeah, see, and I think if he were able to, he would have done so already. I don't necessarily know if he has any cards left to play at this point.
Right, but you don't think that's what they're trying to stop is from him? I think that he has tried. I do think he has tried, and I think they have stopped him. And I think they
possible. It's possible, but at the same time, like, what would stop him after he leaves office? Like, and that's, and that may play into like, well, that's why Twitter deplatformed him. Yeah. But the thing is, though, is that he's going to have other avenues. The only way that he's not going to have any other avenues is if no one, and I mean even RSBN, will run what he says anymore. Mm. And the thing is that, like, if you bring people up, I mean, I kind of brought this up earlier today. There's just some things that the mainstream media just can't ignore. They tried to ignore, for instance, the Lewinsky scandal, which led to the Clinton impeachment, but they couldn't because of Drudge. And there's just so many things that they have to pay attention to, that it doesn't make any sense that they would just.
I don't know that. I think, even the Clinton era was a different time, though. The tech,
true.
The tech overlords didn't have the same power that they have now, and they didn't, and the media didn't have the same cohesion, that they do now. There just wasn't as many of them, and they didn't have the same cohesive force that they do now. So I don't know. Even Clinton's era was actually a very different time, than what we're witnessing now. I think my question comes with he has publicly stated that he would declassify. And then he motioned to make Ezra the head of declassification, who is a loyalist from what we can tell. And I think it's very interesting that no motion has been made. Right.
And that's, I honestly, like, it's very interesting. Honestly, I want him to declassify everything as well. There's a lot that really ought to be declassified. And who knows? I mean, that may end up happening over the next, 10 days or so. But, the clock's winding down. I mean, he already approved Mayor Bowser's request for additional troops for the inauguration.
Yeah.
So I think, there may be a sense there that, maybe it's just time to step away, let the dust settle, and then come back to, reclaim everything in the next little while. I don't know. Yeah. But and you're right. I mean, that is, dependent on whether or not we still have a republic at that point. In all actuality, I wouldn't be surprised if after the inauguration, all this information comes flooding out. Oh yeah, hey, by the way, Dominion actually did do all of this. There actually was election fraud, but thank the heavens there was, because now we got rid of the Orange Man. I mean, that's what I think what will be the next media narrative point, and the next leftist and never Trumper narrative point at that point. Because it's very predictable. Yeah. Because when all this started, like back in November, it's like there's no evidence of fraud whatsoever. Okay, well, there's evidence of fraud, but there's no evidence of widespread fraud. And then, as people actually start listening to this and everything like that, it'll get to the point where they say, okay, so there was fraud, but thank the heavens there was. I mean, that's where I think the next media narrative point is going to be.
So. Wow. I think you're right, actually. Yeah. Orange Man bad. That's their running line. Yep. that seems to be all they have. Orange Man bad. Yep. Wow. Well, so I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, this has been fun. We should do this again.
I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing. I really do enjoy having these types of conversations, not just with like-minded people, but even then, like, you push back on a lot of things. I like that. Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing, is that these types of dialogues are so important, and I wish that there were more of them.
I do too.
But yeah, like I said, I had a lot of fun here.
Yay, I do too. And I do want to address that when you say that, even with disagreements or discrepancies, because I've actually noticed that, and I talk to everybody. I talk to people on the left. I talk to people on the right. And I'm pretty vocal. So, I speak my mind. So, but I've noticed that people on the right are much more open to discourse. They don't have to agree, and they still respect each other. I was on a Zoom call just with friends, like-minded friends. I think it was Saturday, and she's a very good friend of mine. She's like, I know you don't agree with me, Courtney, and I was like, no, I want to hear this, and I love her, and she's brilliant. We just don't have to agree on everything. And sometimes somebody who I disagree with will share their perspective, and I'll think, interesting, and maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I won't, but it definitely. Two things that I appreciate and I respect and enjoy about it is, one is that it may illuminate something for me. I may realize that I was wrong, and what a gift is that, and I get to learn. And two, it may make me feel even more confirmed in my belief but I now will learn how better to articulate and communicate my thoughts. Right. Because when I talk to somebody who disagrees with me, I don't have to be concise and precise in my word. You know, I don't have to be cogent in my arguments. They're just going to agree, and it's just, you know, it's like verbal masturbation. You know, it's just like, okay, you agree, great, okay, you know. But if somebody doesn't agree with me, I have to be. I really have to think about how to communicate so that I can, you know, make my voice and my perspective heard. So that's a gift. So yeah. I appreciate it either way. Absolutely. But I find what I've experienced is people on the left won't even listen. They just shut it down. And that's not fun. You know, It's not fun there's no discourse in that. You know, I was on the debate team. Give me a good, healthy discourse, you know? So yes, I would love to do this again. Definitely. This was a blast. Tell people where they can find you, and definitely go check out his show. Yeah.
It's Freedom's Future. Right now it's being streamed very occasionally on Prof RB on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at Monty287. I was on Parler before they shut it down as Prof Redbeard there.
He'll be back.
And you know, rest in peace. But you know, who knows? Maybe that'll be resurrected someday. But yeah, go ahead and look for me on those platforms, and we'll chat up there.
Yeah, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you so much.